So muscles need energy in order to contract. Initially, the muscles can use ATP. Remember ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is the molecule that has a phosphate on the end that is high energy and is used for most of the different things in your body that need energy. Well, so there's ATP in the cell, and the end phosphate of ATP can be broken to release energy from that molecule. The challenge is that only 4 to 6 seconds worth of ATP are stored in your muscles. So basically you barely get started and then boom, your muscles can't contract anymore. So after that time, you have to remake the ATP somehow. The fastest way to remake ATP is by direct phosphorylation. There are some proteins in the cell. One of the key ones is creatine phosphate. So creatine is a really high energy molecule, and after ATP has given away its high energy, it leaves this ADP molecule. Well, creatine phosphate can transfer energy to regenerate ATP. This is actually just the reason why bodybuilders use creatine, to try to build up more creatine to give kind of a fast replenishing of energy. The problem, of course, is that creatine is toxic to your liver. But anyway, so even this method, the creatine phosphate, only gives you about another 20 seconds. Okay, so 24 seconds in, you're out of energy from those two sources. So the next way to get it, and really this is the big way to get energy long-term ongoing if you're going to be trying to swim for several minutes, trying to run, you've got to get energy from aerobic respiration. And in aerobic respiration, you use these metabolic pathways in your mitochondria. Remember, mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell. They break down glucose to get energy. This is slower. It requires you to always have oxygen, but it can keep going forever. So you can get energy from aerobic respiration for hours as long as glucose is available. So as long as that cell can get glucose out of the blood, and as long as oxygen is available, this will work. The challenge is if you don't have oxygen, there's one other way to get energy, and that's anaerobic respiration, or just glycolysis. This reaction will break down glucose without oxygen. It'll produce some ATP, not nearly as much as aerobic respiration. It's not very efficient, but it's pretty fast. The problem with anaerobic respiration, other than that it doesn't produce all that much energy, is that it produces a byproduct called lactic acid. Well, lactic acid can build up in the muscle if you're doing anaerobic glycolysis for a while, and it can create pain in your muscle. So really, ideally for long-term exercise, you need to have the oxygen around to really be able to regenerate the ATP long term. A muscle can get fatigued, at which time it won't be able to contract anymore. Most common reason for muscle fatigue is there's no oxygen there. So the oxygen kind of gets used up. They're not able to get enough oxygen out of the blood to go through aerobic respiration. And even oxygen is required to get rid of that lactic acid that built up from anaerobic respiration. So you end up in this debt of oxygen. And without replenishing the oxygen, the muscles will just fatigue and quit contracting. You can also get high acidity from the lactic acid, which can slow down the muscle contraction ability. And if you don't have ATP from all those different methods, if you don't have oxygen, if you've kind of built up enough lactic acid from anaerobic respiration and you used up all the creatine phosphate and ATP that was in the cell, you can end up with a fatigued muscle. So in your body, there are fibers in your muscles that are contracted even in a relaxed muscle. Different fibers contract at different times to provide what's called muscle tone. This is not a voluntary process, it's involuntary, where your brain will just send signals and trigger some muscle contraction at all times to make sure that everything is working and to keep some amount of contraction in all your muscles. So, muscles, when they contract, actually move stuff not by themselves, but based on what bones they're attached to. Muscles are attached usually to two different bones at two different places. So here's a good example using your bicep where the origin of the muscle is attached to an immovable bone. So that bone's just holding it in place. And then the muscle inserts at the other end onto another bone, and that's the bone that gets moved when the muscle contracts. So your biceps, for example, the origin of the biceps is in your arm, in your humerus. The humerus doesn't move when your bicep contracts. When your bicep contracts, it actually pulls up your forearm via the insertion where it's inserted into the radius or the ulna. As you exercise, you can increase muscle size, and most of the size of the muscle is not because you've got more muscle cells, but because the cells actually get more sarcomeres and more myofibrils. The muscles get stronger because of those increased sarcomeres and myofibrils. They get more efficient because they're storing energy and they're storing oxygen, and the muscle gets fatigue resistance because they're storing that oxygen and the ATP so that they can contract well. We can talk about muscles based on the type of movement that they create. So for a given movement, the prime mover is the muscle that's the major responsibility for a certain movement. So the prime mover in bending your forearm would be the biceps. Usually there's antagonist muscles as well that oppose that movement. So in that movement, the triceps would be the antagonist. They're kind of holding the humerus steady so the bicep can move it. There are other synergist muscles as well. The bicep isn't the only muscle that creates forearm movement. There are other synergist muscles that help with the angle of the movement. And there are fixators that stabilize the origin. So lots of muscles are holding your humerus in a particular locations to help. So you've got all of these different kinds of muscles in a particular area all working together to get exactly the movement that you want to get.